The street was narrow, lined with cracked pavement and flickering neon signs that had outlived their glow. Just outside Los Angeles, in a part of town where the rich never wandered and the forgotten always lingered, sat a small coffee shop with no name, only a wooden sign with a steaming cup painted on it, half faded by the California sun. Tony Stark pulled up in a dark, unassuming sedan. No driver, no fanfare. He wore a gray coat and sunglasses, not because he cared about recognition. No one in this part of town would dare ask, but because it gave him distance, a way to stay untouched. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped in. It was warm, real warm, not the sterile temperature of a lab or a mansion or a conference hall. There was the hum of a grinder, the clink of cups, the quiet murmur of lives in progress. He liked it instantly. Tony made his way to the counter and ordered a black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just heat and caffeine and a bit of bitterness to remind him he was alive. The barista didn't blink at the name. She just nodded, poured, and handed it to him without ceremony. No autographs, no cameras. It was almost eerie. He chose a table by the window. Outside, cars drifted past without sound. Inside, the aroma of roasted beans clung to the air. He took a sip. It was strong, surprisingly good. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax. The world outside could wait. For the first time in weeks, he didn't have to speak at a fundraiser, consult on a defense contract, or dodge a call from someone needing him to save them, or the world. He just sat, until the chair across from him slid out. A young man, maybe mid-20s, dropped into the seat without asking. He had messy dark hair, a tired denim jacket, and a small worn notebook tucked under one arm. He didn't smile, didn't apologize. He just said, "So? You still drink it black?" Tony's brows rose slowly over his sunglasses. "Excuse me." The man leaned forward slightly, nodding toward the cup. "Black coffee, no sugar. You used to say sweet things ruin the bitterness." Tony stared at him, eyes narrowing. "Do I know you?" "No," the man said, "but I know you." Tony's hand tightened slightly around the ceramic mug. "Look, I'm not looking for a selfie, Mr. Stark," the man cut in. "I don't care about the suit, or the movies, or your greatest hits. I'm here for something else." Tony set the cup down slowly. "Then say it." The man looked him straight in the eye. "My name is Daniel Harwood. My father was a mechanic in Gomera." Silence dropped over the table like a guillotine. Tony didn't move, didn't blink, but inside something froze. "I was 7, Daniel continued, voice even but tight. "He was fixing water systems in a school on the edge of town. Then one day the sky fell. Rockets, fire, and half the parts they found in the rubble had Stark Industries stamped on them." Tony looked away, jaw tight. Daniel smiled bitterly. "You remember Gomera, right?" Tony didn't answer. He didn't have to. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, watching him like someone studying a man in a glass cage. "I thought about this for years. What I'd say, what I'd do if I ever sat across from you. And now here we are. Just two guys, drinking coffee." Tony finally looked at him. Not defensive, not angry, just quiet. "I was there," he said, voice low. "I saw what those weapons did." Daniel's brow twitched. "Must have been enlightening." "It was worse than that," Daniel nodded once. "Still, you came back. You rebuilt your company. You got your clean energy halo and your suits of armor. The whole world watched you redeem yourself." Tony said nothing. Daniel's voice softened. "But not everyone got to rebuild, Mr. Stark." Tony's fingers tightened again around the coffee mug, now cold. Daniel stood, sliding his notebook onto the table. "I don't want your money or your guilt. Just remember his name." Then he walked out. Tony sat there alone. In the silence that followed, he reached for the notebook and slowly opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, was a name, and a child's drawing, faded, folded at the edges, of a man standing beside a little boy in front of a workshop. Labeled in shaky letters, "Me and Dad." Tony closed his eyes. The coffee had gone bitter, but it didn't matter. Some things were meant to be swallowed anyway. The paper sat on the desk in front of him, folded once, light as air. He hadn't opened it again. For hours, Tony just sat there in his workshop, staring at it like it might explode. Like maybe if he ignored it long enough, it would vanish. Just another flicker in a life filled with ghosts and smoke. But it didn't vanish. It waited. Finally, he unfolded it. The name stared back at him, Samuel Harwood. No rank, no title, just a name. He ran it through every secure database he still had access to. Nothing came up. No obituaries, no memorials, just one brief, blurry record. Deceased, civilian. Location, Golmira. Tony closed the screen and sat back in his chair. The arc reactor no longer glowed in his chest, but the weight hadn't gone away. Some burdens weren't made of metal. His fingers drummed against the armrest. Once, twice. Then he got up. He returned to the coffee shop the next day. Same time, same corner table, same bitter coffee. But Daniel wasn't there. He came the day after, too. Nothing. On the third day, he asked the barista, the same one who hadn't blinked at his name. Tall guy, dark hair, denim jacket. He came in earlier this week, sat across from me. She thought for a moment. Yeah, he's been here a few times. Always orders tea. Jasmine, I think. Doesn't talk much. Tony smirked faintly. He talked plenty to me. The barista shrugged. Didn't look angry, just tired. That hit harder than it should have. Thanks, Tony muttered, dropping a generous tip and heading out. He spent the next few nights awake. He stopped working, stopped tinkering, just sat, late into the hours when even Jarvis would have hesitated to interrupt. Tony replayed that moment in his head over and over. My father was in Golmira. Not everyone got to rebuild. He remembered Golmira, all right. He remembered dragging a battered car battery across a cave floor. Remembered fire and sand and Yinsen bleeding out beside him. Remembered the raw terror of watching his name explode, buildings he'd never seen. But he'd told himself something back then. You didn't know. You were stupid, but not evil. He'd built a suit, then another, then an empire of suits. And somewhere in all that steel and redemption, he forgot to ask, how many people never made it out? On the fifth day, Daniel returned. Tony was already there. No sunglasses, no coat. Just a man and his coffee waiting. Daniel paused at the door when he saw him. But then, slowly, he walked over and sat down. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Tony reached into his coat pocket and placed the folded paper back on the table. I looked him up, he said quietly. There's not much. Daniel didn't react. He was listed as a casualty. No follow-up, no context. Just a line in a forgotten file. Daniel nodded. That sounds right. Tony stared at the cup in his hand. I don't have anything to give you. I didn't ask. I know, Tony said, but I still wanted to. Daniel tilted his head. Why now? Tony paused. When I was in that cave, the first thing I built wasn't the suit. It was a list of every contract, every name, every deal I ever signed and forgot about. I promised myself I'd shut it all down, burn it if I had to. And I did, or tried to, but I moved on, started new things, new threats, new wars, and I forgot the old ones. I buried your father without even knowing he existed. Daniel looked away. Tony leaned forward slightly. I'm sorry. Those words coming from him landed differently, not performative, not prepped, just 3 syllables from a man used to being too late. Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. And this time, Tony didn't chase the silence. When Daniel stood to leave, he left behind a second drawing. Newer this time. It was simple. A man and a boy in front of a house. No explosions, no ruins. Just a caption underneath, written in grown-up handwriting. What I remember, not how it ended. Tony stared at it long after the bell over the door stopped ringing. Sometimes memory is a weapon, but sometimes it's a mercy. Tony couldn't stop seeing the drawing. It haunted the edges of his vision, even when he was reviewing specs or rerouting a clean energy algorithm he'd already perfected 3 times. The image would flicker in. Daniel as a boy, Samuel Harwood smiling beside him, the house intact, untouched by fire or debris. It was the kind of thing Tony had never had himself. A father who stayed, a life that didn't fall apart. And it wasn't just the picture, it was the caption, "What I remember, not how it ended." That single line undid him more than he cared to admit. Because for all the blood and brilliance Tony had poured into the world since the cave, since Golmyra, there were still people carrying endings he had started. He spent the next few days combing through old Stark Industries contracts, archives he had locked away in encrypted servers years ago. Most of them were marked obsolete. Some had government seals. Others bore the names of partners long dead or disgraced. But what Tony was looking for wasn't numbers or files. It was names. Civilians. Technicians. The ones who weren't soldiers or shareholders. The ones who had built and maintained and delivered. The ones who had died. At first he found nothing concrete. Faces blurred together. Paper trails vanished into desert winds. But then a single folder caught his eye. Shipment logs from a covert division under Obadiah Stane, dated 2 months before Tony's abduction. Contained within were delivery manifests to regions considered unstable, and on one of them, mechanical maintenance subcontractor S. Harwood. His hand stilled on the keyboard. There it was. Proof. Samuel Harwood hadn't just been collateral, he'd been subcontracted, pulled into the mess by Stark Industries, whether he knew it or not. The signature at the bottom wasn't Tony's, it was Stane's. But the company was still Stark. The legacy was still Stark. And the bullets, the explosions, the fire that had taken Daniel's father had still carried his name. Tony stared at the screen until his eyes burned. Then he shut the file, leaned back, and pressed his palms over his face. This was the part no one ever taught you about redemption, that it doesn't erase anything. It just makes you responsible for remembering. That evening he returned to the cafe. Daniel was already there this time, seated in the same spot, sipping tea like it was routine now. When Tony sat across from him, neither of them spoke right away. Then Tony reached into his coat and slid over a printed document. Daniel hesitated, then unfolded it. His eyes scanned the paper silently. "I found the file," Tony said. "Your dad didn't just happen to be there. He was subcontracted by a division of my company. Pre-Stain fallout. I didn't know, but it doesn't matter. The stamp was still mine." Daniel's face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the page. "So you came here to confess?" "No," Tony said. "I came to show you that he existed in our system, that someone put his name on paper, that he wasn't just a line lost in rubble." Daniel folded the page again and set it aside. "That's not justice." "I know," Tony replied. They sat in silence again, the weight of it shared for the first time. Then Daniel finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "You're the first person who ever tried to bring him back, even a little." Tony didn't smile. He just nodded. "I think about legacy a lot," Daniel continued. "Not because I want one, but because I grew up in the shadow of someone else's. Yours. That's a hell of a place to live." "Yeah, it is." Tony exhaled slowly. "You know, for years I thought I was saving the world by building things, by upgrading, by controlling. But maybe the world didn't need more armor. Maybe it needed someone who remembered the people crushed underneath it." Daniel looked at him. "And now?" Tony stared into his coffee. "Now I think remembering them might be the only thing that still matters." They didn't speak after that, not for a while. But when Tony stood to leave, Daniel didn't stop him. He just picked up the paper again, read his father's name one more time, and held it like something fragile and sacred. Outside, the sky was turning that soft kind of orange that always made Tony feel like he was late for something. He looked up at it and whispered, "I remember." And for once, that felt like enough. Tony didn't sleep that night. He sat on the balcony of the Malibu house, the ocean wind cutting sharp through his shirt, the stars overhead blank and unsympathetic. The file Daniel took with him still sat open on the tablet beside him, a digital ghost that refused to fade. But it wasn't just Samuel Harwood anymore. Once Tony opened the door to one name, others started to follow. Buried in archived contracts, incomplete invoices, coded shipment trails, all roads leading to towns he'd never been to, people he never met, but whose fates had been tied to his name anyway. Some of them were dead. Others were missing. Some might still be alive. But none of them had ever gotten a letter, or a visit, or a damn word from the man who helped build the system that swallowed them whole. By morning, he had compiled 17 names, 17 subcontractors, translators, drivers, engineers, civilians. Every one of them involved in operations tied to pre-Iron Man Stark Industries arms deals. Some had worked on tanks, others in satellite facilities. Some had just signed for deliveries. Most were from places the media didn't cover until something exploded. He sat at his desk, a blank notepad open in front of him, his fingers hesitating over the first name on the list. For a man who had built a dozen suits of armor and once rewired a failing reactor with a paperclip and spite, the simple act of writing a letter felt impossible. The pen hovered. Then he started. Dear Mrs. Amanzi, I'm writing to you as someone who should have done this a long time ago. He didn't know if she would read it. He didn't know if she was even alive. But he wrote anyway. One letter, then another. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't use company jargon. He didn't hide behind "I didn't know." He wrote the truth. He said their names. And with every letter, something uncoiled in his chest. Not guilt, not quite, but the shadow of it. The kind of weight you learn to carry, not escape. A week later, he returned to the coffee shop. Not for Daniel. He hadn't seen him again since the day he handed over the file, but because he needed the silence. The place was half empty, the same barista behind the counter. She smiled when she saw him now, recognition flickering without fanfare. He ordered the same coffee, sat at the same table, and then to his surprise, she approached with a folded piece of paper. Someone left this for you, she said. Said you'd understand. Tony took it carefully, opened it. Inside was another drawing, simpler than the last. Just two figures, one older, one younger, seated across from each other at a cafe table. No faces, just outlines. Underneath it, a single line of text. You remembered. That's all I wanted. Tony closed the paper slowly, his throat tight. He didn't realize until that moment how much he'd needed to hear that. Not forgiveness, not praise, just the knowledge that memory itself had value. That not everything he touched had to be repaired. Some things only needed to be acknowledged. He stayed there for a while, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching the light outside change from gold to gray. No explosions, no metal, no legacy being rewritten. Just a man trying, for once, to be human enough to carry the damage he left behind. That evening, he returned to the workshop. 17 envelopes sat on the table, all sealed, all stamped. He stared at them for a long time before finally gathering them up and walking out the door. The world hadn't changed, but maybe he had. He didn't send the letters right away. They sat for 2 more days on the edge of his desk, neat, sealed, and unmoving, like gravestones in a row. It wasn't doubt that held him back. It was something harder to admit. Fear, not of confrontation or blame or even rejection. It was the fear that no one would respond, that his words would vanish into silence, swallowed by a world that had long since stopped expecting anything good from his name. But then he chose one. Not the first on the stack, not the last, just one. The envelope addressed to a woman named Lila Okoro, whose brother had died 12 years ago in a warehouse explosion in Lagos. He took the car himself. No driver, no AI, no armor. Just him and a GPS pin sent from an old address database buried in defunct Stark servers. The house was small, yellow paint faded from heat, corners cracked, garden overgrown. He stood at the gate longer than he should have, the letter folded in his hand, edges soft from being handled too many times. Then the door opened. A woman in her early 40s stepped out. She didn't look surprised. Not exactly. More like someone who had already seen everything and now expected nothing. Her gaze swept him from head to toe. Not judgmental, not curious, just quiet. You're him, she said. Tony nodded. Tony Stark. I know. He held the envelope out. I came to give you this. She didn't take it. I know who you are, she said again, softer now. I know what happened. I've known for years, but I never thought you'd come here. I wasn't sure I ever would, he admitted. Then why now? He looked down at the letter. Because for a long time I thought silence was safer, that if I didn't speak I couldn't cause more damage. But I think I was wrong. Silence is just another way of hiding. Lila stepped forward slowly, took the envelope from his hand. She didn't open it, just held it, carefully, like it might come apart if she wasn't gentle. "My brother," she said quietly, "used to watch your interviews on the little TV in our kitchen. He said one day he'd work for you. Said your machines were the future." Tony swallowed. He was right. The machines were the future. I just didn't see who they were stepping over to get there. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she sat down on the step of her porch and gestured for him to do the same. He sat. It was quiet for a while. No reporters, no war, just the creak of wind through dry branches and two people staring into the middle distance. "I've had a long time to be angry," she said finally. "At the world, at the men who gave the orders, at the ones who built the weapons." Tony didn't interrupt. "But then I realized," she continued, "that hate keeps you standing still. I didn't want to rot beside his memory. I wanted to plant something, grow something." She gestured vaguely to the garden, where a stubborn cluster of marigolds bloomed beside the weeds. Tony followed her gaze. "That's beautiful," he said, and meant it. She looked at him again, this time with a little more softness. "I'm not going to forgive you," she said. He nodded. "I'm not asking you to. But I will remember this, that you came, that you didn't send a lawyer or a foundation grant. Just you. I thought it should be me." "Yeah," she said. "It should." They didn't speak much after that. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the gate. Before he stepped through, she said, "If there are others like me, go to them. If you can, I will. And if you can't, write." He nodded again, and this time his voice caught a little. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not slamming the door." She gave a half smile. "You'd be surprised what I've learned to leave open." He drove back without music, without AI chatter, just the hum of tires and the sound of his own breathing. And when he returned home, he took the next letter from the stack and started planning the route. Because this wasn't about redemption anymore. This was about remembrance. And Tony Stark had just realized he still had a long way to walk. The cafe was quiet again. The same warm hum, the same old bell above the door. Tony stepped in like it was routine now. No sunglasses, no coat, no performance. Just a man in worn boots and a shirt he'd slept in, with 1,000 unsent apologies folded in his pocket. The barista didn't need to ask. She poured the usual, slid it across the counter without a word, and gave him a nod like people do when they've been watching someone change slowly and chose not to interrupt. He took his seat by the window, the one that faced nothing in particular. Outside, the sky was the color of a page that hadn't been written on yet. He held the cup between his palms for a while before he took the first sip. It tasted the same, but somehow warmer. The last few weeks had been a blur of roads and doorsteps, letters hand-delivered, names spoken aloud. Not every door opened. Not every name was received with grace. Some had been torn in half before he even turned to leave. Others were met with silence, tears, or the hollow weight of someone who had waited too long to hear something that might have mattered. But none of them had turned him away with hate. And that was something. That was everything. There had been a boy in Tunisia who had no memory of his father but kept his old radio, still picking up pieces of broken Stark signals from when the region had been littered with repurposed tech. There had been a woman in Prague who lit a candle every year on the same day, not because she believed in ghosts, but because it made her daughter ask questions. And there had been Daniel, who had started it all, who never returned to the cafe, but whose last drawing now hung above Tony's workbench. 2 silhouettes across a table, nothing more. Tony took another sip and stared at the empty chair across from him. He hadn't told anyone what he'd been doing. Not Pepper, not Rhodey, not even Happy. It wasn't about press or headlines. It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about weight, about finally choosing to carry it instead of run from it. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like Iron Man. He didn't feel like a genius, billionaire, or savior. He just felt like someone who had built 1,000 things and was learning, too late, maybe, how to unbuild the parts that hurt people. The door opened again. A little girl walked in with her mother, The child skipping slightly, hair in uneven braids, holding a napkin she'd folded like a paper airplane. They ordered hot chocolate and sat 2 tables away. The girl caught Tony's eye and smiled without recognition. Just the kind of smile children give to people they don't yet fear. He smiled back. When he looked down, he realized his coffee had gone cold. He drank the rest anyway. As he stood to leave, the barista stopped him. "Someone left this for you last week," she said, handing him a slip of paper. "Said you might come in again." Tony unfolded it. There was no name, no drawing, just 4 words written in sharp block letters. The cup stayed warm. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he nodded. Outside, the wind was soft. The street was empty. No calls, no alarms, no suits flying overhead. Just Tony, walking back into a world that hadn't changed, but one in which he finally had.